Did you know that every detail of your life is part of God's perfect plan? Nothing happens by chance. Think for a moment, how many times have you wondered why certain things happen in your life? Perhaps you have faced challenges that seemed impossible to overcome or gone through moments when you felt lost without direction. In those moments, it's natural to question, why is this happening to me? Or even, does God see what I am going through? Today, I want to remind you of something powerful. God sees, God knows, and He has a perfect plan for your life. Every detail, from joys to difficulties, is part of a larger purpose that we often cannot see in the moment. What if I told you that even in the most difficult moments, God is working behind the scenes, adjusting every piece of your life for something much greater than you can imagine? His plan is not only perfect but also full of love, wisdom, and care. But before we begin, I would like to ask you something. Do you, who are watching, trust in God? If yes, comment below "I trust you, God." And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, I invite you to subscribe. This way, you'll receive notifications every time we post new videos. God does not make mistakes. Imagine trusting someone who sees the beginning, the middle, and the end of everything, and who is constantly working for your good. This is the truth about God. He is infallible. He does not make mistakes, never. And even when things seem out of control, He is orchestrating everything perfectly. A powerful example of this is found in the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis. Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers, unjustly accused by Potiphar's wife, and thrown into prison for years. Imagine how he must have felt, betrayed, forgotten, and with no apparent explanation for all that suffering. But God had not forgotten Joseph. On the contrary, He was working behind the scenes to turn evil into good. How often do we feel frustrated because something did not happen as we planned? Maybe you prayed for an opportunity that didn't come or faced a closed door when you thought it was the perfect solution. But here's the truth. God is never caught by surprise, and His ways are higher than ours. Isaiah 55 verses 8-9. At the right time, Joseph was elevated to a position of authority in Egypt, becoming the second most powerful man in the kingdom. And why? Because God had a bigger plan. Joseph was used to save countless lives during a devastating famine, including his own family. In Genesis 50 verse 20, Joseph says to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." This story reminds us that God calls us to trust Him even in the most challenging moments. That's why I created the ebook Overcoming Anxiety, a 21-day Bible study, a transformative guide that takes you on a daily journey with reflections, prayers, and practical steps to strengthen your faith and live in peace. The link is pinned in the first comment. Don't miss this opportunity to experience God's peace and transform your spiritual journey. This story reminds us that God makes no mistakes. Even when we cannot understand the why of certain situations, He is in control, shaping every detail for our good and for His glory. If today you are facing difficult moments, remember that none of this is in vain. God is building something greater, something that maybe you cannot see yet. He is adjusting every piece of your life because He is a God of purpose, a God who never makes mistakes. Trust in Him, even on days when everything seems uncertain. Believe that He is preparing the best for you, just as He did with Joseph. At the right time, you will see that God's plans are perfect, and that He always knew what He was doing. In the end, you will understand that what seemed like a dead end was actually the direct path to the purpose God has for your life. Everything happens for a reason. Have you ever wondered why certain things happen in your life? Sometimes, we face situations so difficult or unexpected that it's easy to think they are random coincidences or even injustices. But the truth is, in God's plan, nothing happens by chance. The Bible assures us in Romans 8 verse 28, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Notice that the verse does not say some things or the good things. It says all things. This includes joys, but also moments of pain, challenges, and even delays that frustrate us. God uses every detail of our lives to shape us, strengthen us, and lead us to where He wants us to be. Think of a raw stone that, to become a precious jewel, needs to be polished. So is our life. Challenges are not punishments, but tools in God's hands to transform us. Remember the times you faced difficulties in the past. At that time, you may have thought, "Why is this happening to me?" or "How will I overcome this?" But now, looking back, you can see how those situations helped you grow, mature, and perhaps even draw closer to God. Consider the story of David, for example. Before becoming king, he faced giants, both literally and figuratively. He fled from Saul, lived in caves, and experienced rejection. But all of this was part of a larger plan. God was preparing David to become a leader after His own heart, someone strong, humble, and dependent on the Lord. Now, I want you to pause and reflect. Think of something difficult that you faced recently. Maybe it is still an open wound, or perhaps it is something you have already overcome. Can you identify anything positive that came from it? A lesson, inner strength, or even an opportunity to help others who went through something similar. These moments that seem meaningless in the present are actually part of a story that God is writing in your life. He sees the whole picture, while we see only a small part. That is why trusting in Him is so important. So remember, nothing is by chance. God is in control of every detail, and everything has a reason. Even when we cannot understand, we can trust that He is working for our good. And one day, perhaps not today, you will look back and see that every moment, even the most difficult ones, had a greater purpose. God is shaping you for something extraordinary. Trust in Him. Challenges and trials on the path. None of us like facing challenges or going through trials. They can be painful, confusing, and even make us question our faith. But in God's plan, challenges are not a sign of abandonment. They are powerful tools that He uses to shape us and mature us spiritually. The Bible is full of examples of men and women who faced intense trials, and through them, grew extraordinarily. Think of Job, a man who lost everything he had, his family, his health, and his material wealth. Even in the midst of so much suffering, Job did not fail to recognize God's sovereignty amidst his trials. He declared, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." Job 1 verse 21. And the result of his perseverance? God restored his life, giving him even more than he had before. Job became an eternal example of faith in the midst of adversity. Another example is the Apostle Paul. He faced imprisonments, shipwrecks, persecutions, and numerous hardships while fulfilling God's call. In 2 Corinthians 12 verses 9 to 10, Paul shares something profound. But he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me." Paul understood that his trials were not punishments, but opportunities to depend even more on God's grace and for the glory of the Lord to be manifested through him. These examples show us that challenges are not barriers on the path, they are part of it. When we face difficulties, God is shaping us, strengthening us, and teaching us lessons we would never learn in times of comfort. It's like gold, which, to be purified, needs to pass through fire. The process can be painful, but the result is something much more precious and enduring. Perhaps you are facing something now that seems unbearable. It could be a loss, a failure, an illness, or even a period of silence where you feel like God is not hearing your prayers. But know this, God does not waste any pain. Every challenge you face has a purpose, and He is shaping you for something greater. James 1 verses 2 to 4 encourages us. "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Therefore, as you face trials, remember that God is working in you. He is preparing you for something you cannot see yet, but it is part of His perfect plan. Do not give up halfway. Challenges are like stones that pave the road to the purpose God has for your life. And in the end, you will look back and see that through them, God made you stronger, wiser, and closer to Him." Divine wisdom in action. How many times have you tried to understand something happening in your life and simply couldn't find an explanation? It is in these moments that we need to remember that God is always guiding our steps with His divine wisdom, even when we cannot perceive it. The Bible encourages us in Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." This verse reminds us that while our vision is limited and often clouded by emotions or fear, God sees the whole picture. He not only knows the future, He is in control of it. A powerful example of how God's wisdom acts in our lives can be found in the story of the people of Israel in the desert. During the 40 years they wandered, the Israelites faced thirst, hunger, and battles. They often complained and questioned God's plans, but the whole time, God was taking care of them. He sent manna daily, guided them with a pillar of cloud during the day, and a pillar of fire at night. Trust that He is working in your favor. Remember that God not only walks beside you, He has already been to the future and prepared the way. While you may be worrying about the bends ahead, God already has everything planned. When we look at our lives with eyes of faith, we begin to realize that every delay, every closed door, and every unexpected change is not a coincidence but part of a larger plan. Imagine, for example, a father who holds his child's hand while crossing a busy street. The father sees the cars coming and knows the right time to cross. The child, on the other hand, does not understand the danger but trusts that the Father knows what He is doing. So are we with God. Therefore, when the path seems uncertain, remember that you have a God who is infinitely wise, loving, and powerful. He will never guide you to something that is not for your good. When you trust in Him and submit your plans into His hands, He aligns every detail of your life to fulfill His perfect purpose. So, the question I leave for you is, are you willing to let go of control and let God lead? Because when you do this, you discover that divine wisdom is more trustworthy than any human understanding. God knows what He is doing, even when we do not. It is in this trust that we find peace. A greater purpose for every event. Often, when we're going through a difficult situation, it's easy to question why it is happening to us. We might wonder, why am I experiencing this, or what is the purpose of this? The truth is, for God, nothing happens by chance. Every moment, every situation, whether good or bad, is part of a greater plan and has a divine purpose. Even when we don't understand, we can trust that God is working in our lives for a higher good. The Bible teaches us that, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Romans 8 verse 28. This means that even during difficulties, God is working to mold us, teach us, and draw us closer to His perfect plan. He uses every event in our lives, including the most difficult ones, to fulfill something greater. Think about the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and taken to Egypt. He went through years of suffering, injustice, and loneliness. But by looking at the situation from a divine perspective, we see that every step of his journey was part of God's plan to save not only his family but an entire nation. When he finally reunited with his brothers, Joseph said something remarkable. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Genesis 50 verse 20. This is the power of seeing life from the perspective of a greater purpose. God used Joseph's struggles to bring about a grand plan, not just for him, but for many. Just as God used Joseph's pain for a greater purpose, He can use your struggles to accomplish something extraordinary. A contemporary story that illustrates this is that of Nick Vujicic, a man born without arms and legs. During his childhood, he faced immense loneliness and depression, often wondering why he was born that way. However, throughout his life, he realized that his disability was not an obstacle but an opportunity to help others overcome their own difficulties. Today, Nick is an international motivational speaker, inspiring millions around the world with his message of hope, faith, and resilience. These stories, both biblical and contemporary, show us that even in adversity, God has a greater purpose. Perhaps you're going through a difficult situation now and wonder why it's happening. It could be a broken relationship, a loss, a failure, or even an illness. However, God is in control, and if you seek His guidance, He will reveal the greater purpose of that experience. This reminds us that God's perspective on our lives is infinitely wider, deeper, and wiser than ours. He sees the future while we only see the present. He knows the end from the beginning, while we can only look at the next step. God's sovereignty means that even when things do not happen the way we expected, He is working behind the scenes. Sometimes situations may seem chaotic or even unfair, but we can be sure that God never loses control. He uses even adversities to fulfill His purposes in our lives. This leads us to an important lesson. We need to submit to God's will even when it doesn't make sense to us. We don't always understand the why of things, but trust in His sovereignty allows us to rest in the certainty that He knows what is best for us. If we look at the story of Joseph, mentioned earlier, we can see this clearly. Joseph went through betrayal, imprisonment, injustice, and suffering, but he trusted in God's control over his life. Looking back, Joseph saw that although he didn't understand the reasons at the time, God was preparing him to save many lives, including his family. Genesis 50 verse 20. If he had tried to control everything on his own, he would not have seen God's purpose in the suffering he faced. He had to trust that God had a greater plan, even without understanding all the details. God's sovereignty also challenges us to relinquish control to Him. When we accept that He knows what is best, we can rest and stop fighting against His plan. In Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6, the Bible instructs us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." When we surrender to God's sovereignty, He guides us on a path of peace, security, and purpose. This does not mean that we should be passive or discouraged in the face of difficulties. On the contrary, trusting in God and submitting to His will gives us the strength to face challenges with faith, knowing that He is with us and that everything that happens has a purpose. God's control is not a limitation, but a liberation. When we surrender to Him, we release our anxiety and fear, and we live with confidence that does not depend on circumstances. I know that it is often difficult to see God's hand in tough situations. When we are in the midst of the storm, it can seem like He is distant or doesn't care. But remember, God never abandons us. He is sovereign, and His will is always good, pleasing, and perfect. Romans 12 verse 2. Even when we cannot see the way, we can trust that He is leading us. Therefore, instead of fighting against God's plans, embrace them. His sovereignty. Submit to His will, knowing that in the end, He is working in you and for you. Trust in God is what gives us the strength to move forward, even in moments when the future seems uncertain. God is in control, and He never fails. Message of hope. Throughout this video, we have explored the central idea that God has a perfect plan for our lives and that He guides us with love, wisdom, and care, even in moments when we do not understand the reasons for the difficulties we face. Trust in God is the key that allows us to rest in the peace that comes from the certainty that He is in absolute control. Now, I want to invite you to reflect a bit more on your life. How have you seen God act in your circumstances? Which moments in your journey have helped you understand that there is something greater happening, even when you couldn't fully understand at the time? Maybe this is a good time to pause and recognize how God has guided your steps. Finally, I want to leave a call to action. Today, surrender your worries to God, no matter what you are facing at this moment. He knows exactly where you are and what you need. Trust in the perfect plan He has for you, even when it does not seem clear. By doing this, you will find peace because you will know that you are in the hands of the Creator of the universe, who cares for you at every step you take. Remember, you are not alone. God is working in your life in ways you might not perceive now, but with time, you will see His plan unfold perfectly and wonderfully. Trust Him, and in His time, you will see the beauty of the path He has prepared for you. God has a perfect plan for your life, and He will never give up on you. Surrender your fears, anxieties, and doubts into His hands today and trust in His sovereignty. He is in control, and with Him, you can go further than you ever imagined. May God bless your journey, and may you always fully trust in His perfect plan for your life.